Welcome back to the Comic Book Historians YouTube channel. I'm Alex Grand, interviewing Mort Todd, who's had such an interesting and varied career in the industry, almost coming out of left and right field. You never see him coming, but when the product's there, we all love it. Mort, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I'm super honored because when I saw the illustrious list of illustrators and creators that you've interviewed, I was like, why me?
Well, no, I've always been interested in everything you've posted, and I've actually looked up a lot of stuff that you've done, and it's all stuff that I love looking at and that I love seeing. So I'm excited about this. So let's start from the beginning, if that's okay.
From birth?
Actually, yes, that's true. Basically, before you there is darkness, then there was a crack of light, and you came through
on the 8th day.
And that was in 1961. Is that correct?
Way to date me.
Actually, one of the younger people.
Yeah, I'm still in my 50s. So the late 50s,
yeah.
Very late 50s, but
that's right.
I don't feel it.
So yeah, so you're actually Generation X, actually.
I thought I was the rocket age or the space age or something. The post-boomers.
Now, your name is Mort Todd, but you were born originally Michael Della Femine. Is that right?
No. Well, everyone pronounces it differently, even in my own family. So that's why in high school I came up with Mort Todd.
Right, exactly. And so,
yeah.
And what city were you born? Was it Maine?
I was actually lucky enough to be born in East Providence, Rhode Island, or as they say there, Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And but I grew up in Maine.
Are you an H.P. Lovecraft fan or anything?
How could you not be? I mean, Rhode Island likes to take the claim of the horror state, but Maine's really the horror state. Because the stuff Lovecraft wrote, like Innsmouth and all that's where I grew up. I grew up in Yarmouth.
Yeah.
And it had to have been based on Innsmouth or vice versa. Uh-huh. And then there's that guy named King. I don't know. I can't remember his name, but he does a lot of horror stuff up here.
I've heard of him. Yeah, he doesn't like dogs or something, I think. So now, what type of work did your parents do while you were growing up?
First, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad started a union for aircraft mechanics. That he was the union boss for his whole life. He got elected every time for 40, 50 years.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
And he was a comic fan too. He liked Plastic Man, who even before I knew he liked Plastic Man, I love Plastic Man. I think Plastic Man by Jack Cole is one of the greatest comics ever created. Ooh, when I found out I was second generation Plastic Man fan.
Plastic Man, and I remember your Facebook page, your skin actually stretches. Actually. Yeah. You are also Plastic Man.
Something like that. When I was when I first moved to New York at 17, I was a graffiti artist, and Plaz was my tag.
Oh, that's cool.
Short for Plastic Man. I put it everywhere.
Did your dad introduce you to comic books then?
No, we, he traveled nonstop because of his business, and the parents got divorced while I was at a young age, and I was irrevocably harmed. No, I'm just kidding. But what was good is I was growing up in Maine. He lived in New York. So as a youngster, I'd go to New York a lot and go to cons and stuff like that. So that was pretty damn fun.
Now, you read comics as a kid. Was it mostly non-superhero things that you were reading?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was probably 3 or 4, I got a subscription from my grandparents to Walt Disney Comics and Stories. And my sister, because I was a rambunctious youth. And they couldn't take me to movies because I'd run up and down aisles and just, talk with everybody and stuff. So ultimately, I got the comics, and even before I could read, I was just absorbed. And my sister was like, we finally found a way to shut him up. So, so by the time I was 4, I started kindergarten when I was young, 4, and I was already reading by then because of Carl Barks.
You also watched the Batman TV show as a kid too, right?
God, did I? I was learning to read, and I would read the credits, and that hasn't stopped since, right? And it was and it just all connects because I'd see the music was by Nelson Riddle, and I'm like, Riddler? Why did I have the Riddler during the music and stuff? And then I'd see other movies or it's like Frank Sinatra albums or, movies with Nelson Riddle. I'm like, those are the horns from Batman and stuff. Like that's the total composition of the Batman music. And sure enough, Nelson Riddle did the music. So it's been like that with like TV and movie credits ever since I was real little and stuff.
Oh yeah. So then it's interesting. It's almost like comics, TV, and music.
All media.
It was like all media was hitting you kind of at the same age.
And then when I was 11, I was going to summer camp, the YMCA summer camp, upstate Maine. And because of my particular skill at archery, I won a purple feather, which allowed me to go on an overnight camping trip with other kids who won the coveted purple feather. And there I met this kid, Jay Jones, and we got to talking and and he was like, I think he was from California, but he was moving to my hometown of Yarmouth that fall. And it turned out he was Adam West's nephew.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It was. I was just like, what?
Yeah.
So I'd go to his house in my hometown and he'd be talking to Adam West on the phone. I'd be, and then like probably 10 or 12 years later, I met Adam West at a show. It was a Beyond Vaudeville, which was like a public access show that would have like burlesque and all kinds of stuff. And he hosted it. And so I gave him a page we did a parody of Batman and Cracked, of his show. I gave it to him and he's like, oh, that's nice and everything. And I was like, oh, I grew up with your nephew, Jay. And he's like, Jay, he was just in Idaho last weekend. We were fishing. And you know who Adam West's neighbor was in Idaho?
Who?
Van Williams.
Oh,
the
wow.
Green Hornet.
That's cool.
The Batman and the Green Hornet go fishing all the time.
Yeah. You also then discovered Mad Magazine. It was under your uncle's bed with some Playboys. Did I read that right?
You know all the dirt. Yeah. Cause I figured, oh man, this must be super adult because it's with his Playboys and stuff. So I'm like checking it all out. But then I realized I could buy it too. So, and like the story of every other kid from that era is like, I already have this Mad. Like, what's this Cracked thing?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a Mad ripoff. And not as good, but if you don't got a Mad, you can buy a Cracked. I was first exposed to a lot of artists like Bill Ward, because it's what, 8 or 9, and you look at Bill Ward's art with all these voluptuous women, and you're like, I don't know why, but I really like this art.
I can't quite place why that is. Yeah. And what was that, like real life dolls? What was he doing then?
Yeah, because it was like real life dolls, and it was like, there were like these Bardot dolls, and they were all, in their lingerie and all this stuff. Yeah. And I remember reading that and then forgot about it until I was at Cracked, because one of the first things I did at Cracked was read every single issue and the reprints and everything.
Oh, wow.
Because we did a lot of reprints. So I wanted to know what was available. And sure enough, I saw that and I was like, oh boy, that's etched into the recesses of my brain.
Yeah.
Because he would do stuff like, he might be the only guy that does it. It's like, you got your basic cleavage.
Yeah.
He would do toe cleavage.
Yeah.
He would do these chicks in high heels and you could count every toe and the cleavage on it. And there's definitely a market for that. I mean, I'm not necessarily foot fetish, but there's definitely people who are.
Did you ever go back and look at his like Torchy stuff and things like that?
Did I reprinted it. After I left Cracked, I put a collection together, and I think it was the first collection he had. It was called WOW, Women of War. He had thousands of his originals, and they were giant. He did them so massive, and they were reproduced really small. He did them in Conti Crown on the crappiest paper possible, and fortunately got them all back. But the thing was, back then, they were selling for like $25, $50 a piece.
Yeah.
That's the most you could get for them. And now I see they're like 10,000.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Everything's overpriced. Yeah. Now, you were into satire, comic magazines.
Oh, I was waking into superheroes and stuff.
There you go. So let's talk about that. So what kind of superheroes were you into at that time?
Well, I started out being because it's like baseball teams or politics. It's like, DC's cool, Marvel sucks, but then obviously I got addicted and I read everything, Archie, Marvel, Atlas, Christian Spire comics, Skywald. And growing up in Maine in the 70s, you go to flea markets and buy horror comics from the 50s. So I had an insane Atlas collection from the 50s and, all this obscure stuff, Ace, from Canada and junk. So
did you like the 60s Marvel stuff when that was?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because at first I was like, okay, DC's, it's pretty straight. It's got Superman, Batman, and everybody, Flash has a crew cut. And then you read the Marvel stuff and you're like, And then my little brother would get Charlton's and I'd be like, that's so ghetto, But I grew to appreciate them very quickly.
Yeah. I love Charlton stuff, but I like it more as an adult, I think.
And I've got to work with tons of the Charlton artists.
That's right. You did. Now, in high school, did you work on any fanzines, or how involved were you kind of getting into like early forms of like high school publishing and things?
Well, what happened was after I went to this camp called Wawanock, which was like a day camp as opposed to the Y where you stayed for a couple of weeks. And Wawanock, I got involved with their weekly paper, and then I was too old to go there. So I got hired as a junior counselor, probably when I was like 13 or something. And I was in charge of the newspaper. So and it was the old mimeograph, where you print stuff and, spit it out with a drum. But so I do that weekly, and I do comics and articles and stuff like that. And then off season, I was like, you don't need this machine from September to June. Maybe I'll just take it home and print my own comics. And that's exactly what I did. Because, most of them, like if you ever, like in school, they were like purple or blue. I found a way to do multiple colors on one page. So I would do, it was primitive, but I do different colors on every page and stuff.
Yeah, you were kind of getting innovative with that stuff, it sounds like. With the kind of the limited stuff you had at that point, you were kind of pushing the boundary there.
Yeah, and then I talked the camp into doing like a winter comic, basically, to send to all the campers and junk, and they liked the idea to don't forget about Wawanock, So I did like, I don't know if it was probably like a 32-page comic, and I did the Shield, the old MLJ Archie Shield. Without caring about copyright or anything, I did a new story and came up with some new characters and had, like Santa doing something on the cover or whatever. But yeah, I print on color paper and then color ink. So, it wasn't the same old garbage.
You had an alias when you signed those things, right? What was that?
Not for the camp papers, no. That was, the paper was called the Wigwag.
Okay.
And, I used my real name for that. But then, what happened was, I had my printing machine. I was going to Yarmouth High School in my sophomore year. And for April Fools, I thought, you know what? Speaking of satire, I'm going to print up a parody of the announcements that every teacher would get and read to the class. And so I did that. And an old girlfriend of mine was the one that passed them out. So she did it for me. So it was totally legit. And it started out super normal. Like, people who ordered the t-shirts, basketball t-shirts, can go to the office and pick it up. But then it slowly, because it'd be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it slowly got into depravity. It was about drugs and sex and all kinds of stuff. Because by then I was really into undergrounds and junk food. So I was rewarded for that by being suspended. So I was like, screw this, I'm quitting or whatever. But like I got an art scholarship at a private school here in Portland called Waynfleet, which had a bunch of like elite artist types and junk, So
nice.
That was when I, first had carnal relations, which totally changed my life at 15. It gave me a sense of confidence that I hadn't had as a comic book nerd in general.
Yeah, it's like a radioactive spider in a way.
Oh, it was totally. And the transformative powers of punk rock. Because all of a sudden, I had short hair. And this is like I'm saying, late 70s. Maine was full of hippies. I started wearing suits. I had short hair. I was a threat. And like my mom would even say, like, if I didn't know you, I'd be scared of you. I was just, comic geek, but it, gave you some confidence, because that was just it. You could define yourself instead of being defined. And having grown up in the same school your whole life, you get defined, you get stereotyped as like, well, it's the kid that, lost his shorts at basketball or whatever, something like that will stick with you forever. So I went to this new school where no one knew me, and it was really fun. But then that's when I did the newspaper there with some friends, and I did a comic strip called Dr. Death. So they would call me Dr. Death, and that's when I came up with Mort Todd too, because Mort and Todd are French and German for death.
Yes, that's right.
So I've always been a morbid individual. So that would have been when I was like 15, 16. So I've used it ever since. And but then for my senior year, I was like, I felt, I went back to Yarmouth because it was like time traveling, because I'd been gone a year and these people were all the same, but like I had transformed, and I felt like I'm visiting the past. So I graduated from Yarmouth, and it was really fun because, again, I was like the only punk rocker in this town of 3,000 people. And, our class was probably like 80 or 90 or something. And, you've known everybody since they were like 5 or 6. So it was weird. I'd wear jumpsuits and suits, and nobody did that. Because conversely too, when I was like 7, I had super long hair and bell bottoms and stuff. And in Maine, no one had long hair in the early 70s, and this one, it was like 3rd grade, going to the bus stop for the first day of school in 3rd grade. And she was making fun of my bell bottoms and saying like, only girls wear bell bottoms. And I was like, sailors do, but yeah, so I've always been a contrarian.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I respect that. So Mort Todd, as being derived from Dr. Death, was there also some of that of a tribute to the Mort Druckers and the Mort Weisingers, or was that more of a later?
Yeah, that's just it. There was a billion Morts in the comic industry. Mort Lawrence, Mort Meskin, but yeah, Mort Wessinger.
Was that in your mind at that point?
Oh yeah.
At that same point, okay.
Yeah, because like I said, I had tons of comics from the 50s by then. So, and also in the 70s, DC would reprint a lot of Golden Age stuff,
Yeah.
E. Nelson Bridwell in particular, and, do like Johnny Quick by Mort Meskin. And I think Wessinger wrote it, and they'd sign it by Mort and Mort.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you were mentioning underground comics were also kind of trickling in.
Oh yeah.
What was some of your kind of big ones that you were into? Like, are you talking about like Robert Crumb and?
Seriously, I read everything, because again, I was like 11 when I started reading underground comics, and also when I started buying like Playboy and Lampoon, I was like 11, and there was this one like head shop, Erebus, that had underground comics. I think the first one I got was Larry Wells' Captain Guts or something like that. I don't know. But then I got that, I think, Mark Estrin's book about the history of underground comics. So I just had I was the type of guy that read the comic book price guide from cover to cover every year and stuff. So I just absorbed all the stuff about the undergrounds, then found them. And I'll tell you, obviously Crumb is fantastic. You can't deny it. But I've gotten jaded over the years about Crumb, but I've always loved like S. Clay Wilson and Spain Rodriguez and a lot of the creepier dark stuff. And they had an influence on me as a youth too, because it was kind of crude stuff. So like, as far as my drawings, like, well, that's not so far from what I'm drawing, so I could do that too.
Were you into Harvey Kurtzman's Help magazine as well?
Yeah, I didn't see many of them until I moved to New York, and then I got all of them, and plus like production stuff. Like in my craft office for a long time, I had this giant cardboard blow up cover that they used for promotion back in the day and stuff. And I love the photo comics, and I've always loved photo comics, because I guess the first time I saw them probably was in Lampoon and stuff, but then I got internationally into photo comics, and And now I put out photo comics.
Yeah.
And I've been talking about shooting new ones with this character. Where is it? Sadistic. It's behind me.
Yes, Sadistic. There he is. Yes. Now, in 1981, you moved to New York. Is that right? Is that
79? The second I got out of high school, I was like, goodbye. Because like I said, my dad lived in New York, but at that moment they were moving to Rhode Island, back to Rhode Island. So they set me up with a place on it was like on 56th and 5th, right in the heart of the city. And that was what, New York was to me then. It was like, it was right by the Time Life building, right off of Central Park. And so they rented this, I rented this one room from this woman who had escaped Russia in the 1920s. And she was a cosmetologist, and she must have been like in her 80s or whatever. Yeah. She couldn't understand where my head was at. But I was on the second floor. So a lot of times I just go in and out the window because I come home super late at night. So like in 1979, you could be in one of the most expensive parts of New York City and climb up the side of the building, go through a window, and it wouldn't be a problem.
What were you then doing from 79?
The reason was to go to school, Okay. I went to Parsons to study comics, and then I started making comics and making money, doing advertising and record covers. So screw this. So the next year I went to School of Visual Arts and to study film and animation and stuff. And then that year too, I sold the screenplay. So I was like, what the hell am I paying money for going to these schools and junk? So I just started freelancing. But yeah, that's at Parsons. I met a friend of Dan's, Dan Clowes, and Rick Altergott, and we all became, bar carousing, and then we'd meet other cartoonists like J.D. King and Peter Bagge, and we just go to bars and sometimes start fights or sometimes be in fights.
What a fun time.
We got drunk a lot, but and putting out comics. So yeah, we did Psycho Comics. That was like Dan, me, Rick Altergott, and Pete Friedrich was the one that was like the main impetus behind it. He did like all the production and found the printer and got us an ad from Bud Seuling.
So Phil Seuling and Bud Plant, right? Are you talking about
mixing them up? No, Seuling, Phil Seuling, who had Seagate, and they were the first direct sales distributors.
I see.
So we got into stores there. So we were really early direct sales of that. And Phil Seuling is the one that started all the Comic Cons.
So were you friends with Phil then?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. One of the first cons I went to in New York City was must have been, I think, my 13th birthday, and it coincided with the first Famous Monsters of Filmland convention.
Yeah.
And Phil Seuling handled that. And the weird thing too is there just been an article about Karloff that Forey Ackerman wrote, and me and a few kids said Forey, you got the makeup artist wrong on the Ghoul. So we wrote to him, and he did a correction article that had our names in it. So this came out on my birthday at that con, and I got to meet Forey, and I'm had him autograph right next to my name and everything. Had a cool Ken Kelly cover for Terror of the Wax Museum. Yeah. Worked later with Kiss and stuff. But anyways, Phil Seuling was running it, and he was just running everywhere and sweating, and I had to do this and do that. So my stepmother went out and got him a slice of pizza, and he was just so happy.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you helped him out. Yeah.
Oh, and that another funny thing about that. Again, I was I might have been 12. It was on my birthday, so I was either 12 or 13. And I remember going up the elevator with Jim Steranko. And of course, you don't miss it. It's Jim Steranko, right? And I might have been taller than him at the time. I don't recall. But anyways, so we get to the second floor, and this is at the old Commodore Hotel on 42nd Street, which is now, I think, the Trump Hotel. Uh-huh. And it was a rotted out old place. It was really in its last stages. But anyways, the elevator door is open, and Steranko turns to me, goes a lot of pussy here. And even though I was a little deviant kid, I was like, that's rather an inappropriate thing to say to a preteen.
But it turns out you were on a similar wavelength as a teenager. Yeah, who would have thought?
And that was back when no girls would go to cons. It was, before the cosplay revolution.
Right, that's true. That does kind of change that. Yeah.
I'm not ashamed to admit I've had some fairly attractive girlfriends in the past. And whenever they go to cons with me, all the comic people, because they'd never seen girls at cons before.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a unicorn sighting back then, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'd like to think. I am the ultimate comic geek that made good.
Right, yes.
Because I got to work with, everyone in comics likes these comics and the creators, but I got to work with my favorite artists and became friends with them. And the same with a lot of rock bands and junk that I liked as a kid. And when I was 15 in Maine, in my hometown, I met a Playmate model, a Playboy Playmate. And we became very good friends because we were all into rock. And she dated a lot of rock stars that would come visit Yarmouth. So I got to meet, a lot of bands that I liked. And some of my first work was doing record covers for him and junk when I was still like 15, 16. And so by the time I moved to New York, I was already deep in the whole band scene and the comic scene and wormed my way into film and video production and junk. So
it's because the radioactive spider when you were 15, you were saying.
She was kind of spidery.
So the screenplay you sold, is that TV pilot, The Ultimates?
Indeed it is.
To a German production company. Did they ever make it? What happened with that?
Yeah, oh yeah, it got produced and edited, but the series never got picked up as a series. And now that starred Dan Clowes.
Oh, that's cool.
He played. We made him up because he was like super skinny, had a big mop of hair. We styled him to look like Speed Racer, basically. So he had this big dyed black mop of hair and the red jacket and black tights. And so it was all my loves put together. It was a trio of teenage rock and roll superheroes called the Ultimates. And there was this company called the Ultimate Corporation, which sponsored them, and they turned out to have evil motives. And then ultimately, and it involved, the multiverse. And I was just watching like Loki or whatever. I wrote that stuff like 40 years ago because, not that I didn't rip it off from comics before then and stuff, but we had like all these alternate versions of Dr. Ultimate, who ran the corporation. And, some of them were good, some of them were bad. So it just seems sort of like what they're doing with Kang now on Loki.
It also sounds like it would make for a fun, like interesting Saturday morning cartoon also.
But what was just live action? They played a couple songs in clubs, they fought robots in the subway. Because like that back in the day in Canal Street, it was all like salvage stores and remnants and stuff. So I built all these robots buying like gas masks that I did latex to enhance and rubber tubes and their trench coats. And at first, we had a pretty damn good budget from Germany. So at first we got permits from the city to be able to shoot in the subways, and they would give us like special tracks that weren't used in trains, to shoot in. And then finally we're like, fuck it. And we just did it, with people riding the trains and and it was back in the day too, when New York was just covered in graffiti. Everything was covered in graffiti, like the buildings, everything. So anyways, the guy I co-produced it with, and he directed it, he died like 20 years ago, but I got all the original tapes.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I want to re-edit it because not only, because it's wacky as heck, but it's got a lot of historical significance of New York 81, and with Dan. And even if I couldn't re-edit it as a pilot, I think it'd make a great documentary too.
Yeah, absolutely.
To have all these clips and stuff. The guy who played Dr. Ultimate was this guy, Ed French, I think was his name. And he was a friggin' editor at Myron Fass. So he actually gave me one of the cover paintings because it would have like, these chicks dipped in acid or something. A few months later, they'd add a werewolf to it. They just paste on a werewolf and print that cover. And then a few months or years later, they'd paste on, a Frankenstein monster with an exposed brain and all. So like ultimately this cover had about 8 layers on it glued on that they would just keep this thing would just keep evolving, you know.
Myron Fass is interesting because he did that weird Captain Marvel thing with Carl Burgos, and it was just a weird android.
This was about the same time as like Psycho and junk, and when we were doing Psycho comics. And so I met this art dealer, and he'd just been involved with, because, you know, Fass's company bought all the Warren stuff at auction.
Okay.
And, you know, Stanley Harris.
Mm-hmm.
He had worked with Fass for years and stuff. So yeah, so like in high school, I was buying like all of Fass's UFO magazines and Elvis clone magazines, and you know, and I had a lot of the early black and white stuff where they'd get Dick Ayers to take a 50s reprint and add gore to it and expose bones and stuff like that. I got invited to go over to Fass and see this Warren stuff, and so this, you know, it would probably been 17 or something. 18. And so you go into this warehouse room, and there's a mountain of original Warren art by everybody, Ditko, Neil Adams, everybody, right? And so they wanted to start a new Creepy. So I sold them a couple plots that scripts that that never got printed, I don't think, but that was kind of my first pro sale. I don't know. So I visit every couple of weeks, and that pile of original art was evaporating.
Yeah, I bet.
People were just swiping it all to hell, you know? And then I found out Carl Burgos was still the art director there. So I go to see him. He's in this tiny room with no light, hunched over the chair. What would he have been there? You know, been like in the 60s or 70s?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
If not older, I don't know. And I was like, oh, wow, Carl Burgos. You know, I love your you know, 40s and 50s stuff and Human Torch and even Captain Marvel and everything. He's like, what? It's like, I didn't know anyone knew I did comics.
Wow.
And I got that a lot from cartoonists that, like, I go in for storyboarding work, and the head of storyboards at this big ad agency was Jerry Grandinetti.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, oh man, I loved all your, you know, stuff you did with Eisner and the Spectre at DC and everything. It's like, I didn't know anyone knew I ever did comics and stuff.
But you were paying attention to credits from like year 3, though.
Oh yeah. Oh, and not only credits, styles. I like, even at a young age, I could figure out styles because I used to love the Kurt Swan, Murphy Anderson Superman, and then I noticed the backgrounds. I was like, those trees, and I realized Jack Abel was doing the backgrounds. He didn't get any credit. Cool. Yeah. But I realized from like the Hulk, him inking Herb Trimpe, that like that's the way he inks trees. Yeah. So I was like, even without credits, I was starting to figure out art styles, like between pencilers, inkers, and background people and all that.
Yeah, that's really sharp.
Even colorists and letterers and junk, you know, and that was way before I was like a pro. But by the same token, once I was able to hire people, I'd go out of my way and be like, I want you.
Speaking of that, so tell us how you got set up at Cracked Magazine. Like, how did you kind of get into there?
Well, at first, you know, I was freelancing, and I wrote for Julie Schwartz. I wrote some Superman.
Oh, you did? Okay. I was wondering about that. So,
you know, of course, hoping Kurt Swan would do it, but like Schaeffenberger did it and ended up inking it himself, because around then they were having other inkers and stuff. So I was just like, oh boy. Actually, no, it had to be later because it was right before John Byrne took over. So it must have been like 84.
84 even. There you go.
Because I think some of my stories had like the last reference ever to the original Superboy. I did like a story with Professor Lang and Lana Lang and Jimmy Olsen's Professor Father, which is probably the last time they appeared in the Silver Age and junk. And so that was a gas, because yeah, Julie Schwartz taught me a lot about editing with just, you know, just an hour or two would be like decades of education, you know, because he'd been in it for decades and stuff. So, you know, he'd go through my script, and I just sent it blindly to DC, and they ended up, Nelson Bridwell got in touch with me and met with him. And I think I probably told you before, when I was 13 going to DC with my art portfolio, I brought my portfolio to DC, little grubby little 13-year-old. And the art director then was Vinnie Colletta.
Yeah. This is 1974, 75?
Would have been, yeah, 74, 75.
Uh-huh.
And so he goes through my portfolio and goes, yeah, it would have been 75. Yeah. And then he goes, you're never going to work in comics, kid. You know, and like, I was crestfallen. And I go down to Rockefeller Plaza and I'm thinking like, wait, I don't even like Vinnie Coletta's work, you know? So it's like, and then, you know, the ending of the story is 10 years later, which would have been 85. He comes looking for work from me since I was an editor, you know. I'm like,
yeah.
Sorry, Vinny, you're not funny enough for Cracked.
Is that what you did?
I didn't say it in those words, but it was just like, yeah, we don't have anything right now, you know. Because we had an incredible page rate at Cracked, and I could hire anybody I wanted. We had a lot of nutty artists working there that, you know, I never really sought out, but a lot of, you know, artists were looking for work and junk. So I had, you remember Henry Boltinoff?
Yeah. Sure, of course.
Like Super Turtle and stuff at DC. Had him do some pages, and a lot of the older guys like him and Dick Ayers, that Schaeffenberger do stuff. They would, and Severin too, would wear their national cartoonists blazers with the emblem on it, on the pocket and stuff. They were old school. They would always come to the office dressed up in a suit and tie and stuff. Whereas, you know, I was working with a lot of people my age of just bums.
Now, just to give the audience some background. So Bob Sproul started Cracked in 1958 and sold it to new publishers in 1985. So you were around, 23. Were you part of at the end of the old era or at the beginning of this new era? And how'd you get in there?
Yeah, it was the beginning of the new era. Yeah, because they were in Florida originally, Sproul. And so this ad agency in New York bought it and thought, be good getting into publishing because, they'd place ads for publishers. So they had access to distribution and stuff like that. And the way I first heard about it was they were trying to find an editor for the magazine, and they called Larry Hama because he had done Crazy at Marvel,
Mm-hmm.
And I had done some work for Larry too. I did like a Savage Sword of Conan pinup for the Black and White magazine with zombies fighting Conan and all that stuff. So anyways, he was like, he wasn't interested. So he asked his assistant, Pat Redding, who had gone to school with and was a pal and did, a lot of club hopping and crazy adventures with. And she suggested me and a few other people. So Crack called me up and I was enthused and showed them that like I knew the dirt. What it turned out was that they had hired this guy, Paul Laikin, who had worked every humor magazine for like 30 years, from Mad to, he was there in 85 when they got hired. You can see a clear demarcation of when he started because the last Sproul issue had a Severin cover and his first issue had a cover by his son.
So, that's funny. So there was a nepotism from the first day, and he started 85. He was with the new people.
And it turned out it was worse than nepotism. He was ripping off artists and the publisher.
Yeah.
So anyways, he was, he's probably younger than I am now, but he was kind of like an old con man pretty much. And, and the publishers wanted a youngster who was more in tune with the kids, for the readers, because this was 85 and Laikin was still doing Nixon jokes, and I was like, kids don't know who friggin' Nixon is now,
Yeah.
And why beat a dead horse, anyways. So, so they hired me as an assistant or associate editor or whatever. And so at first, like I said, I read every friggin' issue. I did inventory of everything. So I get super familiar with everything. And then at first I just like criticized all the crap he did. And it turned out he was getting kickbacks from artists. First, he gave them crummy page rates to begin with, and then got kickbacks. And like, I told the publishers, if you don't get Severin back, this magazine's dying. It's going to die. Because I think they did, probably like 4 or 5 issues without Severin.
Right.
Which it wouldn't exist without Severin. John Severin's work, it's just.
Yeah. And that was like the first thing you did and recommended, right?
I told them that. And so they were like, get Severin at any cost, you know? So I got in touch with him and he was like, yeah, Laikin called me, and it was something like he offered $100 a page and wanted 25 back from it or something.
Insulting, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, well, what would you want for a page rate? And he said 500. I was like, I'll get it for you.
Yeah.
It's worth it. And he was getting like 1,500 for covers and stuff. So he's like, okay, I'll work, but only if I deal with you and not Laikin, right?
Yeah.
And then I found out from other artists about all the kickbacks. I found out that he was reprinting stuff from like Sick magazine and putting a cracked logo over Sick.
Oh, wow.
Which could have gotten the publisher sued and all this stuff.
The funny thing about Laikin is he was a comedy writer for people like Milton Berle, Jackie Gleason, you know, Alan King. Like he was like in this older generation.
His pockets were stuffed with scraps of gags. At the time too, Cracked was doing, I think then it was 8 issues of new material a month, but there was something like 24 reprint books at least a year.
Yeah.
And he was packaging them just so haphazardly, and they were stupid. And he would have like these bonus iron-ons or whatever that weren't even printed on official iron-on paper. They were just regular paper, you know, and just do all these puzzles. And, you know, I was roughly like 10 years older than the readers. Yeah. And I was like, I don't want this crap. I wouldn't want it 10 years ago, and I don't want it now. So he was like, I was telling him about it, how crappy it was. And he was like, well, maybe you should try and do all these books. And I was like, I would like to do all these books. So anyways, they bounced him. Mm-hmm. Then they figured, okay, now we got to find a real editor. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, they didn't consider me, right? So meanwhile, I was the only one that had the publishing schedule for some reason. So I put together like 3 or 4 issues myself while they're still looking for editors. And I'd sit in on the meetings, and all these people would be like, all right, well, the first thing you got to do is change the name and get rid of the mascot. And they were like, we just paid whatever dollars for this, and you're telling us. So, I mean, there was stuff like that, or they wanted to make it more adult and more violent, or, you know, and it was just like, so I was just putting out the book myself. And finally, they would be like, like within editorial meetings, like, when's the next book due? And I'd be, like 2 months from now, or whatever, you know. And so finally, I don't know how it happened, but they saw the numbers on my books, and they were like, you want the job? And I was like, So I was a youngster doing quite well in the publishing industry.
Yeah, you were.
Page rates were great. So after Severin, the first person I called up was Ditko, Steve Ditko.
Yes.
And I was like, would you like to do some humor work? And his studio was like 2 or 3 blocks away. He was there in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he had a portfolio of stuff to prove that he could do humor.
Yeah, you were already familiar. Yeah.
So that became a great friendship. And at Cracked and at Marvel, he would just visit the office for hours, and we would just talk about everything under the sun. You know?
What were you guys talking about? What was the kind of stuff you did?
Movies, books, comics, comic artists, all kinds of stuff.
Did he ever mention like his favorite movie or anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
What was it?
Well, one day he was like, you know, I want to get a VCR, and I'm not sure how to hook it up. And I was like, dude, I'm there for you. So I went over to his place, hooked up his VCR. He already had a copy of Fountainhead. The Ayn Rand, yeah. And she wrote the screenplay too and everything. And obviously, even before the videotape, he'd seen it many times. I don't know where, because it wasn't necessarily a regular on TV, or, you know, he didn't have cable, and I don't know how many times they would rerun it in the theater and stuff, but he knew it frame by frame and explained stuff like, well, when he's in the ambulance driving through the city, looking through the window, there's the cross from the hospital, and it's sort of a sign that the city is sick. You know? So, you know, he had it down. So I would say that might have been one of his favorite films, but he was a big foreign film fan. Because like in the 60s, New York had a bunch of like art house theaters that would, like Toho Studios itself had their own theater, and they would show their either dubbed or captioned films before they ever came out in America or distributed by America. So he'd seen all of the Kurosawa films.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And even like the non-brand, you know, samurai and stuff that like even didn't make it here. Same with Italian films. You know, he just saw tons of the giallo, you know, the horror and gore films. And in fact, there's a character in one of the slasher movies that has no face, and is in a suit and everything, looks exactly like The Question.
Yeah, I know about that. That's an Italian one, right? He watched that movie?
He said he just watched tons of Italian films.
And that was one of those characters. I see.
And a lot of them, like I said, didn't even make it here, you know?
Did he ever talk about like personal matters or relationships or anything like that?
Like once I mean, the first I found out about his family in Johnstown and stuff was I had optioned the rights for Mr. A because I wanted to make a TV pilot and put out some new comics. And he sent me everything he had, all the Mr. A comics that had been put out in the 70s, crates of them. And they were all from Johnstown. So like, you know, he had them stored with his family and junk. So,
oh, wow.
Not too much, no, but he sure did appreciate my girlfriends. I'll tell you that. Whenever a girlfriend was in the office, he was like, and they were charmed by him, you know, they thought he was the greatest and stuff because he's just a neat dude.
Was he pretty charismatic in conversation?
Yeah. He really took an interest in what you were talking about and, you know, added to the conversation and stuff. And it's certainly nothing like, you know, what he's supposed to be like and, you know, his dour J.D. Salinger type.
Right. It wasn't like that. Yeah.
I mean, what it boiled down to, I think, was like a lot of comic fans just banging on his door while he's trying to work, you know, and like, "Are you Steve Ditko?" You know, to be slam. But, you know, if you were interesting. In fact, when he passed away, I got a call from Frank McLaughlin, you know, I'd done a little bit of work with Frank, and Frank was kind of incensed because of, you know, what the myths about Steve Ditko were and everything.
Right.
So we did like a 2-hour interview that I still haven't finished editing yet, where he talks about, you know, the fun side of Ditko and like, you know, because at Charlton, McLaughlin was art director. I see. And so a lot of cartoonists would come out to Derby, Connecticut, where Charlton was. And Charlton had this whole facility, you know, from editorial to printing to distribution. Yeah. And so they had like, you know, they had like a bowling alley in the basement and, you know, all these, a catering hall for like when people got married and all this stuff. So Ditko would come out there a lot and they'd play baseball and, you know, just all kinds of pranks Ditko would do and stuff. And yeah, pranks. That's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. Yeah. I was at a con once and this guy comes up to me and says, "Yeah, my mom used to be a secretary at Charlton. And there was this other secretary who would sit at this table that had no front to it, you know? And there was a guy, like a traveling salesman, who would come every time and he'd you know, he'd see her and he'd like look under the table at her legs and all this stuff, right? And be real annoying. So Ditko knew he was coming and got this giant sheet of paper and drew these gnarly, hairy, warty legs. And they put it under the table. So when he went there. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's my first reference I've heard to his sense of humor in a social situation. Well, you can check out like the stuff he did for Cracks too. He would do the sight gags in the background that weren't in the script, you know, and some of them are kind of offbeat, but you see where his head was at, and he was being funny. Last question about Ditko, then back to this. Did he ever talk about like politics ever? Was he like, "Oh, that Ed coach is ruining this city," or not particularly about Ed, but yeah, he complained about a lot of politicians like Teddy Kennedy and junk. And, you know, as far as politics, we talk a lot about Ayn Rand because he was a student of Ayn Rand's. I gotcha. Went to the classes and stuff. So you know, he was kind of an objectivist.
Yeah, right.
And an individualist and stuff. So that colored a lot of his conversations on things.
I get you. Okay.
And the same with Severin too. Severin was pretty conservative. Yes. And, you know, I'd probably talk to him many hours a week, maybe, you know, a dozen hours a week sometimes. And again, we talk about everything: comics, old comic publishers, comic personalities, movies, everything. And so between, you know, Ditko and Severin, I was probably, you know, like 15 hours a week, you know, talking with these guys and junk. So it definitely colored my outlook on things.
Okay, so they left an impression on you as far as how you look at stuff also then.
Yeah, because in the 60s, like Severin was a John Bircher.
Yeah. And
like he mellowed out over the years and stuff. But it's funny, sometimes you look at some of the stuff from the 60s or 50s and you're like, okay. That he probably wouldn't have done later in his life. Yeah.
You also worked with a lot of our artists like Gene Colan, Gray Morrow.
And they became great friends, you know, and their wives, you know. And I've always said, like with those guys in particular, that they are so lucky. And like Don Martin and his wife, and Severin's wife, they handle the business so that the artist can just be chained to the drawing table, get the work done, and they can play good cop, bad cop with the publishers.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like the wife can call them like, "Where's that check?" You know, stuff like that, you know? Or we need a raise and stuff like that. And I've always envied them for that.
And you got these guys paid really well too, right? Was it like what, $100 a page or something like that?
It was usually about it's probably about $250 a page.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, and that was back then. Don Martin was getting $12 a page, $1,200.
Yeah, $1,200 a page. Wow.
Because we had to swipe him for Mad, you know. So
yeah,
we offered him the same rate, but we also gave him his copyright and returned his original art, which Mad never did in 30 years. Yeah. And we got him on a health plan because he had really bad eye problems. He was legally blind. At the time, I was using 3 legally blind artists. Colan was legally blind, and Bill Ward and Don Martin. You know, so but they were still cranking it out because, you know, you don't have benefits in comics.
Yeah.
You know, to make money, you got to crank that page out, and you're at the whim of the publishers. Like the same with Ditko, he couldn't get work from Marvel and stuff. Colan couldn't get work from Marvel. Kirby, all the guys that started Marvel couldn't get work in the 80s, you know, from the company that they made, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Residuals and junk. So. But yeah, Gray was hilarious, and his wife Poco, short for Pocahontas. They had a beautiful place out in Jersey, like kind of like a log cabin-y type thing. And whenever we were at cons, like Gray and I were 90% at the bar.
Oh, that's cool.
And Gene and his wife Adrian, sweethearts. You know, because I worked with Gene at Cracked and for my Monster magazine and at Marvel, and he was fed up with inkers and just wanted to reproduce from his pencils. And I'm like, sure, you don't need no stinking inker. You know, we can do it beautifully from your pencils. The advantage at Cracked was like it was an incredible page rate. And like, you know, at Marvel or whatever, you got to draw 18 pages, 22 pages every month, and you get less of a page rate. So I always thought that Cracked was sort of like, you know, doing like actors who do ads or short films or whatever, cameos, because, okay, you're doing 4 to 8 pages, but you're getting paid like 3 times as much. And it's black and white, which some artists really embraced rather than doing the color comics and junk. Like Ditko in particular, he would try every kind of medium in each story. He would do like the do-a-shade paper, where you have the tones that would appear with the chemical magically. And he would do like wash or markers or this. Because like some people think like, oh, black and white's limiting, but you know, you can embrace it and do some pretty genius stuff.
Now you were also bringing in like new people as well as work with some of the older people. So you brought in like what Dan Clowes into crack, like Peter Bagge also, right?
Yep. Yeah, because like I said, they were old drinking buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny because the publisher hated Dan Clowes' work, hated it viscerally. Like Dan and I did a strip we created called The Ugly Family that I wrote and did layouts and he drew. And so the publisher saw it hit the roof. So we slipped it into one of the reprint books. We got tons of fan mail.
Oh, that's cool. So the publisher kind of backed off.
So every time the publisher disagreed with me, we'd get such a positive response. And finally it was like, okay, do whatever you want.
And they trusted you after that. Yeah.
Because that was another thing I did with reprint books is, like I said, with Laikin, he would just throw anything in there. I came up with themes, you know, because like I always liked monsters, and Cracked had done tons of monster parodies over the years. So I created a title called Cracked Monster Party.
Yes, right.
A ripoff of the movie Mad Monster Party. And it became insanely popular. It ran for years after I left it. So because of the success of a horror humor magazine, I was on my publisher's ass to do a straight horror magazine, because we had all these artists working for us at Crack that had worked at EC and Warren. They knew horror. Mm-hmm. So I was like, let's do a book. And it was like, oh yeah, well, we'll see. So I just did the book on my own. You know, I commissioned the stuff. I ordered a printing press date. I got a UPC and distribution thing. They didn't know I did this until it came out. And they were pissed as hell. I had already had stuff for a second issue. They canceled it. And they were so pissed. And then like 2 or 3 months later, they're like, those numbers are pretty good. So they're like, why don't you start that magazine again? And that's what I was saying, like with the publisher, everything they hated, I proved that like, no, it's pretty good. And so I just recently put out I reprinted the books.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, there's 2 volumes, Monsters Attack. And it's got like, it's got Severin, Boyette, Pat Boyette, who's another great talent. Gene Colan, Gray Morrow, Alex Toth, lots of stuff. And I don't know if you can see it on my mantelpiece there. Got a hardcover coming out in the fall that collects the 2 volumes in October around Halloween.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'll definitely get myself a copy.
And I should probably tell everyone that you can find all my fun stuff at morttodd.com.
morttodd.com. That's right. As far as Dan, you also did some stuff with him with Fantagraphics around the time that you were at Cracked, right? You weren't just locked into Cracked.
It might have been a little before than when I first started. Yeah, we did. Well, like at Psycho, we collaborated on a lot of stuff. Like I would write and pencil and he would ink and letter, or I don't think I ever inked anything. And I did a few Lloyd Llewellyns. I wrote a couple and I penciled at least one that Dan inked. And then also at Kitchen Sink, we did a strip called The Squirt, which was like a homicidal Dennis the Menace. And that was in a couple issues of, I think, magazine Twist. And then Dan wrote one after I stopped doing it.
And you did something called Divisible Man with him, is that right?
I did indeed. Thank you for asking. And in fact, that was definitely inspired by the Myron Fass Captain Marvel.
Yes. Yes.
Because, like I said, I was a big fan of Plastic Man, and I was trying to come up with something visually alarming that wouldn't be like, you know, Plastic Man, but would still be like, what the hell? So, yeah, I came with that. Have you seen the trailers for the new Suicide Squad?
Yes.
Have you seen TDK, the detachable kid? They got a character, one of their characters, whose arms pop off.
I see.
I think it's by actor Nathan Fillion or whatever.
Yeah.
And the scene I saw, like the arms just float. They don't really go at any speed, and like they slap these bad guys and stuff like that. And I was like, damn it, they whipped me off.
Yeah, that's the Divisible Man right there.
And I also did a comic called Protoplasman for Big Bang. And that was a total Plastic Man homage. And it was like all of Jack Cole's stuff mixed together. So it had a little Daredevil, a little Claw, Plastic Man, and that was fun to do. And that was for Big Bang with Gary Carlson.
Your mind was like pointing a lot of directions, and that's probably why Cracked has more of a diverse look to it rather than everything just copying Jack Davis.
Well, see, a lot of artists when I started at Cracked were doing Davis and Drucker, and I continued to use some of them, but I was like, get your own style.
Yeah,
that's how you make a name. As a clone, you're just going to be third rate. And every artist has their influences. You know, some like, you know, the super early Kirby, you know, he's swiping Kniff and whatever, you know, or Alex Raymond even and junk. And then, you know, when you create your own style, you become a commodity and people want that style, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my first rule at Cracked. It's like not copy mad, except where it helped.
And so speaking of getting Don Martin to come over, there's a picture I saw of you at the Mad office getting Bill Gaines' autograph, but he didn't know that you were from Cracked at that time, right? Tell us about that.
No, because I would have been like 25. Why the hell would he think, you know, his competition would be wearing shades and a t-shirt and a skateboard and stuff, you know? So this is a funny story. Have you got a minute?
Yeah, of course.
So we were, I was at a comic convention. Pretty sure we had a table for Cracked and everything. So I'm walking around, and I was a big skateboarder then. I would commute to work on a skateboard.
Yeah.
And I also created like a Monsters Attack skateboard with a Severin cover and all that shit.
Oh, cool.
But so we were at the con, and I saw Mad had a table, and I was like, interesting. And they had a Alfred E. Newman skateboard, and I was like, ooh, I wouldn't mind one of them. So I bought it, and the guy at the table was Chris Gaines, who was I was gonna say Max Gaines, Bill Gaines' son. And so I buy it, and I go, you know, I know Mad used to have tours. Does Mad still have tours? And he goes, we sure do. And he gave me his business card, and it's like, give me a call and I'll set it up. And I was like, fantastic. So ended up calling him, setting it up. At the time, every now and then, Cracked would allow me to hire short-term assistant editors who would do like production work and stuff for me.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had Ian Wheeler Nicholson, who was the grandson of Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, was my assistant editor. So we go to Mad. It was him, my art director, Cliff Mott, who's a stunning personality. I haven't mentioned enough about, I haven't brought him up, but he was the glue for Cracked Magazine, an incredible talent, great cartoonist, done a lot of record covers and stuff. But anyway, so the three of us go there, and you know, Ian's like 18, Cliff and I are like 25. And so we're like, ooh, Mad, you know, and so they give us the tour and, you know, show us original artwork that they didn't return to their artists and stuff. And we saw some Don Martin stuff, and we were like, gosh, why did Don Martin leave Mad? And they go, because his wife's a bitch. It's like, oh, really? So, you know, we were talking about the history of Mad and EC and all this stuff. And so finally they take us to Bill's office, and he's not in there, but you might have seen pictures with the Zeppelin and King Kong and all that stuff. And so we're there waiting, and Bill comes thundering down the hall. Well, not thundering, but waddling. And so his son, Chris, says, Dad, here are some old DC fans. And he looks at us, he goes, those aren't old DC fans. And I thought we got narked.
Yeah.
You know, I thought he was like, that we're from Crack. He goes, those are young EC fans.
Yes.
Because I was looking around, and it's like, we're trapped. There's no way to get out of here.
That's like out of a movie. That's hilarious.
So we were talking, and I was like, I introduced Ian. I was like, his grandfather worked with your father. And, you know, so it was all like, whoa, happy home week and all that.
Yeah.
And so we did it. He signed my skateboard, and I was like, I need a photo of this. So we got a photo, but I wasn't a big enough dick that I would print that photo and cracked. So I sent it to Thrasher magazine.
That's Thrasher.
And they printed it.
Yeah. And that was like 1987, I think, right?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, 1987.
After we had Dawn, yeah. So Gaines found out and hit the roof because we had spies at Mad. We used a lot of writers and junk under pseudonym because if Gaines wouldn't allow you to work for other publishers and junk, and you'd be fired if they found out. So I had a few spies there, and they said, yeah, he hit the roof. He said, this is kind of personal, but he said they were at, like, it was a Christmas party or some shit. This writer and Gaines were standing at the urinal in the bathroom. And and he goes, that guy cracked his balls of brass. I was like, I respected Mad. I just didn't like what they did. Also around the same time, Mad, 60 Minutes was doing a piece on Mad. So I tracked down the producer, and I'm like, you're fucking 60 Minutes. You're supposed to expose all this shit. And I told him about like how artists didn't get their art returned. They don't get reprint money. Gaines owns it all and like auctioned it off. And if he did, he might give you some money if you're alive and if he likes you. But if he doesn't, you don't get any money from the auction. I told him all this shit. He was like, no. They did a puff piece where it was all like, oh, those wacky guys are mad. And
yeah,
this is another difference between us, is that they had 7 editors. At Cracked, it was me.
Yes.
So you had 7 editors getting a script and each wanting to put in there 5 cents. And then you had John Ficarra, who had like a drum kit in the office. So if someone said something funny, he'd be like, bum bum. I'm watching this on TV, and it was just a butt kiss,
Yeah.
So much for 60 Minutes and their hard-hitting journalism.
Yes.
Because that would have been news.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're right. A lot of times it is that way, even now. So, in the same year in 87, I saw a couple things. Joker's Joke Book with Joey Cavalieri. You worked on that for what was that for DC?
Yeah, it was freelancing for DC. It's just basically, 101 Joker jokes, and
yeah,
with like what happens to the Joker's green hair when you throw him into the Red Sea.
What?
It gets wet.
Duh. Yeah.
Super stupid. Yeah. So yeah, I did that, and then also that year I crashed the movie set for the Batman movie. And what did that come out? 88, 89 or whatever?
Yeah, 89, yeah.
Yeah, so it was in 88. And because I had a British girlfriend at the time, so I'd spent a lot of time in the UK. And a friend of hers was the assistant art director on Batman, on the movie. So we go one night after hours, and we go with her, and there's a guard, and he goes, do you have a chit? And I'm like, what's a chit? And it's like, it means like pass in England, right? And we're like, no, we don't have anything like that. And he goes, well, if you go down by the end of that fence, you'll be able to get in. I'm like, ooh, thank you. So we go on the set. It's at Pinewood, where they shot all the 007 films. And since she was the assistant art director, she had all the keys and junk. So, we go down like the main street in Gotham where like they had the big church and, and all the sets, it was fantastic. And then she took us into the art director studio, and I got photos of the Batmobile, which no one had seen anywhere, and all this stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
And and all kinds of set design and stuff. So for not one of the first times, but we beat Mad with their parody because I had all the source material.
Yeah.
And Mad is owned by Warner Brothers, who made the movie, and they didn't get anything. And I got it all. And so we came out months before Mad. Because another thing with the 7 editors at Mad, they always had to figure, like, we got to see what the box office does, if this is popular or whatever. And I was the sole voice. So I was like, oh yeah, we're doing Batman.
Yeah.
So so I brought a copy of my Joker Joke Book to England. and gave it to the assistant art director. And it's like, why don't you give this to Jack Nicholson and maybe you'll give him some inspiration. But I got photos all over the place, you know, like sitting in front of the Batmobile with my book.
With the Joker joke book. Yep. That's great.
Yeah. So by then, Mad was getting hate mail. When I first came to Cracked, we actually got fish in the mail, you know, which is a mafia sign of like, you know, you're going to die. And you're like, you rip off Mad and all this stuff. And my spies by then were saying like, yeah, because we had like a 1 month lead. I think they had a 4 or 5 month lead before printing. Plus, like I said, they had to check box office and TV ratings. And I'd just be doing it by the seat of my pants. And we'd be out months before them. And so they were getting hate mail. It's like, you're ripping off Cracked.
That's awesome. Yeah. You turned the tide. That's what you did.
The one time I really screwed it up is we did a parody of Leonard Part 6. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Leonard. Yeah.
Bill Cosby spy film.
Yes.
And it bombed, but it was still fun. Rick Altergott art, so it's always fun with some Altergott.
Leonard movie, right? Isn't it just one? Well, how many were there?
It was just the one called Part 6.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, because that was the funny part about it, because it's Part 6 already.
Yeah, I liked it though, but yeah. And I think I remember looking for other one. I'm like, where are they? Yeah.
Because like that previous year, we had Cosby on the cover so many times, you know, they were like, how can Cosby fail? And where is he now? Like,
yeah, that went south. It ended up going south.
See, that was another thing I do too with covers is that you know, a lot of times Mad would just have one image. I was inspired by Kurtzman, and I have like 50 people on the cover involved in a fight or this or that. And you'd have like Schwarzenegger, Cosby, Michael J. Fox, you know, whatever. And then as many titles of TV shows or whatever we were doing possible. So it's like, well, if you don't like this, you'll like this.
Yeah. That's almost what that Will Elder chicken fat stuff, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Because I laid out every cover we did. And I was definitely inspired by Kurtzman with that stuff, you know. So
yeah.
And then to have like Severin do the finishes, like, ooh, you know it's gonna be good.
Yep, that's right. Now also you did in '87, if I read this right, the Return of Skyman with Ace Comics, and that was with Steve Ditko. Is that right?
Yep.
What was that project all about?
Well, because I guess Steve did the new Face. Golden Age character, the Face, and Frank McLaughlin was inking it. And for some reason, he couldn't ink the 3rd issue. So I suggested Altergott because I thought, you know, he's kind of like Wally Wood. So, you know, and Ditko and Wood always went well together. And that's when Steve told me they wanted to revive Skyman. And I was like, ooh, 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 ooh. You know, so. Yeah. So I sent in a plot and got accepted, and that company was just too ambitious, and you know there was like the black and white comic book glut of the 80s or whatever, so they went out of business. It was going to be a 3-issue miniseries, and I plotted it all, and it was like all time travel-y and post-apocalyptic and all that, and it was really fun. But probably about like 5 years ago, I did a special edition of the book because I had copies of Steve's pencils before they were inked by Altergott for Skyman. So I did a book with page by page samples. So like you could see Ditko's pencils and the finished work. So, you know, because like not many people have seen Ditko's pencils and junk. So it's just, if you're a geek like me.
What year did you leave Cracked, and why did you leave?
90. Because they were doing phenomenally. And like I said, I was one editor, and I was probably putting out, including the reprints, over 30 books a year. And, you know, I sacrificed a lot of personal time because, like, you know, I never missed a deadline. And sometimes I'd be staying up all night because they came up with things like, let's do a Cracked digest, you know, because the distributor's doing real well with digests by the cash register, like Archie and horoscopes and junk. So, all right. So I had to, like, it just threw it on me. So I had to like cut and paste this whole book like overnight, like 150 pages or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so because instead of just shrinking all the pages down, I did like 2 panels a page or something. A lot of things like that. And like, you know, and girlfriend would be like, when are you coming home?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all this. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, by 90, I was like, I want a raise. I want a full-time assistant editor and probably something else. Cause I like to travel and jump, and I hadn't been traveling and stuff. So they were kind of against it. And so I gave an ultimatum, and they were like, bye. And
I see.
I found out that they were in the process of selling the magazine.
I see. Okay, there you go.
So they were able to say, okay, here are our sales. This is what it costs. Here's our profits. 1 editor on salary. When I left, they had to hire 5 editors to replace me.
Yes.
They had 3 main editors and 2 assistant editors to do all the work I was doing.
Which is more expensive.
A little. So I think the original publisher kind of bamboozled the new publisher, and you know, and so I think, you know, as smart as I thought I was, I think I kind of got squeezed out without me knowing it. You know.
Yeah, that's true. That stuff happens. You already talked about the WOW World of Ward magazine, where there was like Torchy and he also did Pussycat also, I think, right? Back for Martin Goodman or something. But
no, there wasn't any of that in there. No, Marvel still owns the rights to that, I guess. I'm not really sure, but I'd love to see a nice collection of that.
yeah.
It wasn't all Ward.
Right. Wally Wood also. Yeah.
Yeah. Jim Mooney did, I think, the lion's share of it. But there was this, I think Woody inked one of the Ward stories, and I think Bill Everett inked another one of the stories. And do you know who Al Hartley is?
Isn't that the Spire guy?
Exactly. When I was a kid, I had his autobiography.
Oh.
That he wrote. It was like, "Come meet my friends," is the title, and has him in front of the drawing board. Since that Stan asked him to draw Pussycat, and that's when he quit Marvel, because he said, I'm not going to draw any pornography.
That was his critical.
It wasn't any nudity or anything. It was just, you know, and Al had done pin-up gags in the past.
Yeah, it sounds like Spire was a good fit for him, obviously.
Oh yeah, I loved all those comics because they were oh. And not only the ones he did, but like maybe he did do all of them. But there was like Crossing the Switchblade, which was based on a movie with the guy who played Paunch on SWAT. I mean on Gibbs, Eric Estrada. When he was a teenage, he played like a Puerto Rican hoodlum that like I think stabs a priest and then finds God. And they actually showed that movie in like elementary school. And it's like, you couldn't do that nowadays. A Christian film. And then they did the comic based on it. And the other one, great one was Hansi, the girl who loved swastikas.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Which is a weird cover, but the story is actually a true story of a girl who escaped Nazism, but the cover is just so strange.
Yeah, it's trippy.
Yeah.
And the thing is that Al Hartley, whenever he drew people accepting Christ or having an experience, he would draw like all these little flashes going on. And it was the same way he'd draw people in Archie that were like stoned or psychotic or on drugs or something. You know, they'd have like the same little flashes like, I'm getting enlightened.
Yeah, and Archie was wholesome back then anyway.
Back then.
Before the zombies and the sex, yeah. Okay, you mentioned the Monster Party stuff, but there was also Monsters Attack for Globe Communications. How did you get set up with Globe Communications of all things?
Well, what it was is the guys that bought Cracked.
Oh, okay.
They did all of Globe's advertising.
Oh, that's how it was.
So they kind of did it on an umbrella because Globe did so many, you know, did the newspapers, the tabloids. They did the horoscope books, the puzzle books. Mm-hmm. So they teamed up with them to, you know, piggyback with the printing and distribution.
I actually miss seeing Bat Boy.
You ever see Pete Bagge's Bat Boy comic?
No, I didn't know that.
He used to do a strip in the Enquirer or the Globe, I guess it was. Yeah, for I don't know how long, but yeah, he did a regular strip.
Oh, I have to look at that.
And then in New York, there was a Bat Boy musical like 10 years ago.
So what did you do between, like, let's say '90 when you left Cracked, and then before Marvel Music started?
That's a very good question. Well, I started my own small imprint called AAA, for Allied American Artists.
Okay.
And again, I was very ambitious, too ambitious perhaps. I did that Bill Ward magazine.
Yes.
I had a second issue, which never came out. I had like a great Russ Meyer interview with it because Bill had been illustrating Russ Meyer's autobiography. And then I was going to do a 5-issue Mr. A series with Ditko.
Yes.
And Ditko ended up drawing, I think, like 3 issues. I solicited the first one because it was going to be color comic. Because I was like, you know, Mr. A has always been in black and white. And, you know, that's his whole bag. But unless you see him in color, you don't realize he's all white. You know, he's got a white metal mask, in a white suit. You don't notice that in black and white so much. Whereas if you did it in color, it would be a stark contrast.
That's true.
So Steve and I had plenty of conversations about how color would work in a Mr. A comic. And so we're going to do a 5-issue series. And I solicited the first issue, and it was like, I got like 1,000 orders, you know, and with a color book, this is before digital.
Yeah.
So each page to get color separated costs like $100 a page. So I was already 3,200 in the hole just to do the separations. And with only selling 1,000 copies, couldn't do it.
Yeah, it wasn't enough of a demand, basically.
And like I said, Steve drew about 3 issues. Robin Snyder's put out some of the stories, and I've like in the last, you know, like 5 or 6 years, I've colored on computer a lot of the stories, and would send them to Steve to get his reaction and all this stuff, and he loved them. But so, you know, and I've talked with his family, and you know, maybe we can see him in color finally.
Right. That's right. Just to give the audience a little background on Marvel Music, Terry Stewart was the Marvel president. He wanted to kind of go beyond superheroes, and they did a test with an issue in 1990, Busted, starring Cheap Trick.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right, and that sold pretty well. That was like a little dabble into a music comic. So then there was an interest by them to go down that road. So tell us about starting Marvel Music at Marvel, and how did that all occur?
Well, like you said, they wanted to expand. Terry was a great innovator and could envision comics outside of the comic shops. And the original promise was that they'd get them into record stores and bookstores, and it ultimately just ended up with the direct sales market. So that withered on the vine. Another thing we were trying to do, and we did several times, was, you know, like package the comic with a new CD or a new album, do music videos to promote them, actually press vinyl and CDs and cassettes, and have the bands take them on tour. Like, we actually did some phenomenal numbers when the bands sold them, you know, with their other merch, you know. So
did Terry call you, or did you call that? How did that?
Well, again, that was my friend Pat Redding. I guess she was still at Marvel, and she told me I was on a short list.
Oh, okay.
Because they knew, you know, I did comics and I was in the music world. So
and that you had success with Cracked as well. They knew that.
Right. So yeah, had an interview with Terry and the publisher, and we all just like kept matching shots of whiskey and stuff. So it was a good first meeting. Of like, you know, I drink a lot, and they're like, so do we.
So they hired you then, and you were editor-in-chief of Marvel Music then. That's what the title was.
Yeah. I had it was a separate imprint at first. I mean, it took me about a year to get all these contracts together with the bands and licensing agencies, because these were legit. Like, they had done the rock and roll comics before. They were unauthorized, right? So we were doing them, actually licensing them from the bands and the estates and, you know, the labels and stuff. So it took me about a year, you know, before anything could really happen. And meanwhile, the editor-in-chief of Marvel there thought I wasn't doing anything. and and didn't like my autonomy, I don't think. So he gave me a project to do 4 reprint titles, and I was like, cool, I want to do like horror and crime.
Yeah.
And they were like, and I was thinking Western too, maybe, but they're like, no, horror only, because I thought it'd be cool to do some crime comics and Westerns and stuff. So what they gave me 4 titles with 4 issues. And seriously, I was working really hard on these Marvel books, but they didn't know it. So I was like, okay, I want to put all 4 titles out in 4 months, 1 title a week. So 16 weeks of these titles. There was like a giant monster comic.
Yeah, that's Monster Menace, right?
That's the one. There was a pre-code called Curse of the Weird.
Curse of the Weird. So this is all like Atlas stuff then?
Yeah. And there was a Book of the Dead, which was Frankenstein monster and man thing.
Yeah.
And then I did, just to be a total sellout, I did a Dracula versus superheroes.
Oh. The superhero one is a sellout one. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, okay.
So the editor-in-chief, though, that was Tom DeFalco then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the Dracula books, I got like the hottest superhero artists at the time to do the covers. But I in retrospect, I should have just had Gene Colan do them all, right? Dracula. But the other books I had, Ditko did new covers. I got a lot of offbeat artists to do covers for him, and some I got painted covers. Like the guy who did our Bob Marley comic was a Rasta, and he did like the zombie and man thing that looks like he's made out of weed almost.
Oh, cool.
And I got Gray Morrow to do this Frankenstein cover with the bride.
Yeah.
And carrying the bride in the snow. And he sent me the photo reference he took, and he had wrapped his stepdaughter in toilet paper, and he was carrying around with a Frankenstein mask to use for the reference.
That was for Marvel, not Marvel Music. So even though you were editor-in-chief of Marvel Music, you were basically carrying your weight and doing that too, or something like that.
Geez,
right?
Yeah, and I had to travel a lot, which was such a pain. But I'd visit the bands in the studio while they're recording, or sometimes go on tour with them, or see them when they're playing various places in Chunk. And the other Marvel editors were very unhappy about that. I had pretty much unlimited expense account. Yeah. And so like if I went to the San Diego con, after the con, I would stay at like Chateau Marmont for a week or so and have parties and all this stuff. And, a lot of people went up to LA after San Diego, and they were like, I gotta stay on a friend's couch and had to pay to fly out here. I was like, well, if you had to go to Vegas to interview the Hulk, I'm sure they would have paid for it.
Mm-hmm. Did you look at some of that earlier music Marvel magazine stuff like Kiss and Beatles from like?
I reprinted them, yeah. And we talked with Apple about the Beatles, but that didn't happen. But I reprinted the 2 Kiss books in a one issue called Kiss Classics, and we did a new book called Kiss Nation. And we got Ken Kelly, who, like I told you, had been on that first magazine my name ever appeared in, Famous Monsters 111, I think. But yeah, he did the Kiss paintings in the 70s and stuff. So he did like this gatefold poster, and it was Gene's idea to have it based on Fantastic Four #1. With like, cool. Monster coming out of the ground, grabbing all the Kiss guys.
Okay, I did a newspaper search on you a little bit, and so in 93 or 94 they're talking to there's one that says Mort Todd, the head of Marvel Music, was in Seattle talking to bands, and then you admit there was one that said that there was a Alice Cooper project, and then you said that he was a fan of the comics himself, and that the comic helps visualize his album. So you were kind of on a media tour.
Yeah, the Alice book was written by Neil Gaiman.
That's right, yeah.
And illustrated by Michael Zulli, who I think did some Sandman. It's beautiful. Oh, yeah. And so the first issue, it was The Last Temptation of Alice.
Yes.
Was the name of the album and the comic. And the first issue was packed with the with the album. They had an elaborate package in Japan with a box set with the comic and the CD and there was they shot a video that was in rotation that featured art from the comics, and it was pretty good. And we did 3 issues of that, and we got to meet Alice a couple times, and once like in Arizona while he was playing golf at his golf club.
That's fun. Yeah. And Neil Gaiman loves music as well too, right? I mean,
this was his whole concept, and he actually, I think, got the ball rolling before Marvel music started, and I think he pitched it to DC and Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I mentioned earlier too is that I also been headhunted by DC when I was still at Cracked. They wanted to start an alternative line, and I had connections with Clowes and Bagge and the Hernandez brothers and junk. So, I pitched them a whole bunch of junk, and they didn't go with it. They went with this thing and they called it Piranha Press. Really sad, really sad. I could have done some great stuff with their money. That was another thing at Marvel too. I pitched, Millie the model, right?
Yeah.
I pitched a new series with Los Bros Hernandez, and DeFalco turned it down. And it was like, that would have been, groundbreaking.
Yeah, Millie the Model by the Hernandez brothers. Yeah, exactly. Why did Marvel music end in 1995?
I was at a meeting and they were saying like, we just can't sell Elvis Presley and Bob Marley. And I was like, what? I was like, you could do Elvis tampons and make $1 million. And they were like, well, the comic shops don't want them. And I'm like, no shit. This was supposed to be out getting them in record stores and in bookstores and, and get them on tour.
I see.
And it wasn't supposed to be about the comic shop. So my contract was up pretty soon. And I was like, fuck it. I'm not going to renew my contract, because, there were some people saying like, oh yeah, have him renew his contract. And so we can have him finish these other books that weren't finished yet. Because a lot of the books never released. I had a super cool AC/DC one where AC/DC goes to hell and hangs out with Bon Scott. It was like the original singer who's dead. And so there's Elvis. We did a 3-issue Elvis that was Elvis was on the ghost train. So he's sort of like a ghost, and the train stops at different points in his life. So the framing sequence of the ghost train was Gene Colan, and then the biographical parts were John Severin.
Yeah.
So it was a big discerning difference in the artwork to tell the story. And, so we had a lot of stuff that just never came out, and they were like, oh yeah, well, renew his contract and make him do this stuff. And then, then they'd probably put me on some shit comics, because also at Marvel too, to keep me busy, I did Biker Mice from Mars.
Yeah.
Which was an animated show. And I'm sure there's a few other things I put out. Oh yeah, they put me on a Christian book because they made all the editors do these Christian comics with Thomas Nelson, who's a religious publisher in Nashville.
Oh.
So at least I got to go to Nashville. But so they gave us a list of Christian books, and I was like, I picked the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. But this was a book about, they were just basically letters from the devil's nephew, Screw Tape, and trying to get advice about how to screw over this one guy and turn him the wrong way and stuff. So I did it as a total underground comic, this Christian comic. And it was like, so all the demons were all like Rat Fink with warts and outie belly buttons and all kinds of stuff. And each page, I just did it legit. It was just like the letter that the little demon was writing, and put it on paper to look like, rotted out flesh. and all behind it was like, sort of like, Sergio Aragonese at Mad.
Yeah.
The marginals, so it was all everything illustrated in the letter, like a montage of all these, gross demons and junk. And so this was a Christian book, and I got away with it. And I got Gaiman to write the forward for it because he was a big fan of C.S. Lewis and stuff. So all the other ones were, they were atrocious. So I enjoyed doing this book, and But the other one, oh geez, they just used like the most boring artists, and they didn't know the material either.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had at least a familiarity with Christianity, you know, to like be able to do something. But they had this one series called The Illuminator, which was about this football player who gets superpowers, I guess from Christ or something, I don't know. But and he wears a football outfit as his costume.
Yeah. So there were some misfires there, yeah.
This one editor who was in the news recently for in Central Park he was a bird lover that felt he was racially profiled. You remember?
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, he was an editor at Marvel back then, and so he's doing one of these books, and he's like, well, in the script it says that the guy accepts Jesus as his personal savior, you know. And of course, I read enough chick comics and Spire comics to know, you know, how you could make that look in a comic. But he had no idea. So I basically told him, like, you know, when Galactus hit Norrin Rad he gave him the galactic glaze to become the Silver Surfer. It's like, do it like that. Because how many times in comics have people been transformed? And it's like, come on, use your imagination.
So using the superheroes as a reference, now it made sense, yeah. But ultimately, everybody should know that Marvel music did not completely go away. It actually got retooled for Marvel Studios' music soundtrack division. And that's still currently called Marvel Music. So you were raised Christian then growing up?
Not particularly. I mean, you know, my dad was Catholic, my mom was Protestant, and she worked at a church for a while. And yeah, and I was in chorus for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
And we do Sunday school. She told me this story recently where it was in Sunday school and I was drawing a picture, and the priest goes like, what's that a picture of? And I was like, God. And he goes like, nobody knows what God looks like. And I was like, when I'm done, they will. And of course, it was like, it looked like Shazam or something, you know, some old guy with a beard and robes. I'm like, come on, that's God.
Now you have a lot of skills. It's not just comics. There's publishing, there's animation, advertising. So when you left Marvel Music, then is that when you started to kind of go into other things?
Well, no, even after I left Cracked, I was doing a lot of storyboarding for TV commercials, and always been doing album covers and band posters, and I've taught a while. Like I actually substituted for like 2 semesters for Gene Colan at School of Visual Arts, and the whole thing was like, if you're into comics, you're not going to be a millionaire. So use those skills in other media. I've done like, branding, logos, packaging, art, all this stuff. And so, it's any port in a storm for illustrators. Because, I mean, like I said, look at Colan and Ditko and everybody in the 80s couldn't get work at all,
Yeah.
There's some like Kirby and a lot of artists would do storyboards from the West Coast for animation and stuff.
Okay. And so you were also doing stuff like that along the way, basically.
Yeah.
And then after Marvel Music, you were continuing to do things like that.
Yeah, I probably dive more into video and film production, and did like TV commercials and storyboarding.
TV commercials and storyboarding. Yeah, that's cool. I read that in 1999, there was a 10-page comic of Sebastian Bach. Is that right?
Yeah, because I had met Sebastian at Marvel, and we were gonna do a comic or something, and he's a big comic fan. When he was a little kid, his dad's a painter, and he had on his bedroom wall the Hulk busted through the wall. So we did a photo shoot with him, and also a KRS-One with Spider-Man and stuff on the roof and all this stuff. Yeah.
Kind of a controversial guy, but this is before all that controversy. John Kay from Ren and Stimpy, you actually developed something with him?
Yeah, this was while I was still at Marvel. Yeah, I mean, that's just it. I did so many other things at Marvel, I don't even remember. I did a lot of licensed stuff and tried to do other stuff. There was like a there was a Saturday morning live action Sea Monkeys TV show with the Chiodo brothers.
Oh, wow.
And I was trying to get a deal with that because I was like, what's more obvious than a Sea Monkeys comic, you know?
Yeah.
Especially if it's a TV show. But yeah, this is a tangled web, but a previous girlfriend had moved out to LA and was doing animation on Ren and Stimpy. So I'd go and visit a lot and stuff, and you know, for Marvel stuff. And so, you know, went to Spumco, which was Chris Falusi's studio and stuff. And this was right after Nickelodeon swiped Ren and Stimpy from him because of supposed deadline things, when it was actually like in-house backstabbing from other artists working there. So I was like to John, it's like, Ren Stimpy's not your only idea, right? You must have more. And I was like, this is what we can do. Because like if he tried to start a new TV series, the studio would own it, you know? They would own it again, like with Ren and Stimpy. So I was like, this is what we do. We take you new characters. You get a deal with Marvel where it's not work for hire, that they're licensing it from you. So you own the rights. We do it as a comic. And so you own the thing, then you pitch it for TV and stuff so that you're in a position where it's like, sorry, you can't own it, you know? So yeah, we did this series and it was called Comic Book.
Yes.
And John's idea, we did it tabloid because it was John's idea, like, so that an adult would be like a little kid. Because like when you're a little kid, comic takes up this much of your head, whereas like a tabloid would be like that and stuff. So we did 4 issues. And again, Altergott was working at studio then, and he did a lot of the comics for it. And so we did 4 issues, put out 1, they got canceled. You know, they had, again, they were saying, oh, we're going to get this distributed here. They showed me like these mock-ups with cutouts of Jimmy the Stupid Boy, life size, where they would stack the comics in his butt or something, and you pull it out and he'd fart and all this. You know, it's like, they had elaborate plans, but of course didn't do it. And of course, comic shops were like, we can't fit tabloid comics in our shelves and stuff. So anyways, the 3 other books, I think Dark Horse put out the 3 other books.
That was Marvel that then after one issue they came. Okay, interesting. Comic book, yeah. DC did something like that a few years ago. Mark Carroll put out those Wednesday comics, and they were like a big newspaper thing.
You ever hear of Sojourn? Because like in the 70s, Kubert put out a book and had like Severin and a bunch of people, and it was a newspaper sort of thing.
Yeah.
But and about 10 years ago, I put out a free weekly newspaper called Vex.
Yes.
That had it had Altergott and a bunch of other artists, and you know, just again, it was doomed. We did it about a year weekly, which is a lot of work, but we just didn't get enough advertisers.
That was 2012, right?
Yeah.
And that was about a year, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So then now also just to give the audience an idea of some of the commercials that you storyboarded for, like Disney, Sesame Street, MTV, CBS.
Oh, that was animation. That was actual animation. Yeah.
Actual animation. So tell us about that.
Well, I was working with the studio in New York, and you know, whenever they needed animation, they'd nail me. There would be like, I don't even remember what they call it now, upfronts. Like when networks would present their new shows in the fall, you know, like new TV series, and jump to advertisers, so they get an idea of what, you know, what to buy from and stuff. So I did a bunch of animated wraparounds for that. Sesame Street, I did a couple animated musical stuff with this character called Calamouse. And you know, they weren't really, I don't know what the educational aspect of them was, but they were fun to do. And Disney, you know, it was just like something about a grasshopper, and I did like a bunch of shorts for Howard Stern's old TV show and corny stuff.
Like, what did you use to animate? How did you get into animation?
Well,
exactly?
I mean, lately I've always animated old school. You know, like there was another one we did a pilot for MTV. That was a half-hour pilot called Spider Virus. I only did one segment of it with Christopher Walken. Where we actually rotoscoped him turning into a werewolf and stuff.
Yeah.
So all of that it's old school. Like that was, until about 15, 20 years ago, we'd actually do it on the wheel and draw it and lift up the paper and see how it looked and move this arm and that and everything.
Yeah.
But since then, I just draw stuff haphazardly. I still do it old school and draw it and then scan it and then use like animation programs to move stuff.
What, like After Effects or something? Yeah. I animate my motion comics using After Effects.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those are cool. Yeah.
Oh.
I forgot about those.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, you've seen those. That's awesome.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
You've been doing them for a while.
Yeah. I've made I think 7 of them, and there a lot of Ditko from Charlton kind of stuff. Yeah. It's pretty painstaking stuff though. I mean, just for like 7 minutes, it like takes me like 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, like I said, having worked in old school animation, it's like, the shortcuts.
Yes.
So a lot of times, you avoid a lot of grief, knowing what you're getting into and how you can reuse stuff or just zoom in on the same picture and it looks different or flop it, whatever.
That's true. You're right.
Am I not right?
Yeah. No, that's really funny.
Well, because like as a kid too, you'd watch the Marvel superheroes, the Grant Ray Lawrence.
That's right. Yes.
Where they just drag a picture across the page or zoom in on it and just have a one arm go
right, and then shake the camera a little bit too.
Yeah. So you learn from that stuff and you go like, I'm not going to do it that way, but something to be learned.
Something similar. Yeah.
Actually, going back to Gray Morrow and 60s Marvel cartoons.
Yeah.
He worked on like the second, third season of the Spider-Man that Bagge did,
Yes.
and did like the craziest psychedelic backgrounds.
Yeah. So that was
like
him.
Spidey zipping through a night scene and there's like green clouds and pink and blue.
Yeah. Those Bakshi episodes are like a whole nother thing.
When I was in school, NYU had like a screening of, was it Rock and Rule or the Frazetta sort of thing that Bakshi did?
Fire and Ice.
Yeah, I think that was it. And so I went to the screening and they had a Q&A after, and that's all I kept asking was about the Spider-Man show. When you were doing that Spider-Man show in 60, it's like, we're here to talk about.
But the ones he did, like there were ones where they were like in a coffee shop and you'd see a band playing and they'd like kind of trail the camera to see.
I actually edited a copy of that because that is just so cool.
It is. I love that scene.
And then they got the same band playing.
Yeah.
And the girl singing without any vocals.
Yes. Dude, but it stands out. The Christopher Walken one you mentioned, that's actually on YouTube. People can watch it, right?
Yeah. I've got I don't even know how to get to my YouTube page, but I got a lot of like ads I've done and animation, and
I've subscribed to that actually.
Why, thank you. You were the one.
That was me. Yep. That was me. In 2000, you made a media company, Comics Fix. Is that?
Yeah.
What was that about? Yeah.
Comic singular fix.
Comic Fix.
Well, I got asked by the New York Post to create some comic strips because, like Peanuts and all that stuff, they get licensed and, they're in every paper. So they actually wanted to create some unique comic strips that would be unique to their paper. And so I came up with 3 strips, and it was actually the amount of work of 4 strips because one of them was an interactive comic strip. So it had like two tiers instead of one.
Yeah.
So I was writing all 3, doing layouts for all 3, penciling for 2 of them, and lettering and coloring and all that stuff. But because earlier too, I'd done a Rat Fink strip with Big Daddy Roth, and we tried to get that going, it didn't happen. But so for the Post, that's why I created Comic Fix, but also did other advertising and junk. But we did I licensed Speed Racer, did Speed Racer comic for a year, and I created this strip called Celebrity Biographics.
Yeah.
Which had celebrities, and Severin drew that. John Severin drew it because who could draw celebrities better?
Yes.
And what that would be like, it would tell someone's biography in 3 days. And we usually based it on their birthday, so it'd be semi-topical. And then the other strip I did, and this was pulling back from the past
Yeah.
of what I told you about earlier.
Yes.
Is a strip called Molly the Model.
Yes.
Not Millie,
Yes.
but Molly, because at the time I was going with a model called Molly.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
So it was awfully based on a lot of the grief she went through being a model, and like, you know, going to look-sees and it'd be like, you're too tall, you're too short, you're too white, you're too exotic, you're too this, you're too that, you know. So, but it was an interactive comic strip, so it was like soap opera. So we had like 3 plot lines going on where it was like, what should Molly do? Should she do this? Should she do that? Should she do this? Fill in your own answer. And so they'd go to the New York Post website and, you know, vote. And I usually pretty much already planned what was going to happen. And it usually the people voted the way I steered them, you know, so like it never had to like rewrite anything too much. And so I don't know, that might have been the very first and very last interactive daily comic strip.
But it's innovative and it's interesting.
And then 9/11 happened, and we had to change the strip really quick because couldn't be so lighthearted all of a sudden, you know.
How long do you think that effect lasted, making things serious after 9/11?
It depends on the, you know, on the project or whatever. I mean, you know, on the one hand, we started getting soapy again pretty quick, just because, you know, try to take people's mind off it maybe a little.
Take their mind off it. Okay. Now, in 2005, there was a return to Cracked. What was that all about?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, they this company bought it, and they wanted to turn it more into, you remember FHM, or, you know, all these like lad mags that were like kind of, you know, they certainly weren't Playboy or anything, but they had like chicks and models and stuff like that. So they kind of wanted to turn it into that, you know, and do like a more adult version and have like, you know, potty humor and stuff like that. Right?
Uh-huh.
So I went to a couple interviews for them, and what they were doing, just their whole business model was stupid as hell. It was like, the editors would get a piece of whatever contributors they could get in the magazine. So it sounded like Laikin again, like you're getting a kickback. The only way you're making money is if the publisher accepts these things, and there's no guarantee of that and everything. So it's just, and it would be like, and the page rates they offered were a fraction of what Cracked was before. So I wasn't going to go out of my way and get any of these artists and writers, and especially since, you know, they had no real vision and stuff. And I think it lasted 3 or 4 issues.
They were their own worst enemies there.
I bought the rights to Sadistic, which is a photo comic from Italy, and I started doing that. So I was a real big fan of Diabolic, and I was thinking, you know what? Maybe we do Diabolic as a, you know, in English, you know. There've been a few attempts, but because it's an Italian thing, it's a different one. And so I looked into getting the rights, and they wanted a lot. But then this broker told me about these photo comics that had been published since the 70s. And it had different names around the world. It was called Killing in Italy, and Satanic in France, and a couple other names. So I was like, and it was a lot cheaper to buy it outright than to lease, to license Diabolic and stuff. So I bought the rights and put them out in English. And so this is the character here.
There it is. Yeah.
Dude in a skeleton suit that ends up like, you know, tying up femme fatales and burning people. He's a master of disguise, and it's a photo comic that features a lot of actors who were in a lot of films in Europe in the 60s and 70s that were in like, you know, science fiction films and spy films and horror films. So it's pretty interesting if you're into that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I am. Mm-hmm.
Like in like 2007, I produced this film that this Italian director tracked down all the actors and interviewed them, and it was pretty phenomenal. It turned out the guy who played Sadistic had a contract where he wasn't allowed to show his face or anything on the set, or so like all these actors that worked with him didn't know who he was. And so half the film is sort of like this mystery. Who was he? You know, and they go like, oh, it was this actor. And that actor goes, no, it was me. I think it was this actor. But anyways, it turns out that, so the director tracked him down and he unmasked for the first time in the documentary. And it turns out he's like the Italian Regis Philbin. He had like a daily TV sports show for decades and stuff, and no one knew his secret identity. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's fun.
Big premiere in Italy and everything, and with all the actors, and they're all great people.
How fun. So now, a year before Vex Magazine that you mentioned from 2012, in 2011, I read about something called Station A, that you started for print advertising, comics, and TV commercials. Is that right?
Right.
Well,
yeah, that was the that was the company that put out Vex.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the weekly comic newspaper. And then
was that your company, Station A?
I co-owned it. Yeah.
Co-owned it. Okay.
Yeah, and it was I had an investor. You know, Gene Simmons taught me OPM, other people's money. Never use your own money. So yeah, I did a few TV commercials that I directed and that were universally hated, and you know, a lot of print advertising, junk like that.
I gotcha. Interesting. Why were they hated? What do you mean?
Well, made fun of vegans in this one commercial for Burger.
I read about this. There's a big flare up about that.
And the other one was animated, and it was for a Mexican restaurant. And it had you know, lucha libre, different wrestlers, and I used this song track called "The Crusher" from an album that I did the cover for years ago, and that Freddie Blassie did a cover of the song "The Crusher." It's like, "Do the crusher," so it was super noisy and heavy rotation, and it was like we got letters like, you know, I was falling asleep at 3 a.m. and this commercial came up and I couldn't go back to sleep and stuff like that.
In 2013, there was some practical joke about a fake comic line called Zeus Comics. What was that? Like you said that you found
it was the April Fools, and I was like, I came up with all these fake covers of these comics from the 50s that were you know, like, because, you know, like the whole comics code thing and word them and all that. So they were like all over the top with, like, you know, commies and zombies and Martians and crime. So I did all these fake covers, printed them out, aged them, stapled them onto, you know, old guts of, like, you know, 64-page Archie comics from the 60s or something, bagged them, put stickers on them saying they were worth like $1,500. And I got this comic store to go in on it with me, and we said, like, oh yeah, we were like tearing down this house and we found all these old comics behind the wall that are worth thousands and stuff, and so they fell for it, and newspaper and TV and everything covered it, and then the next day on the 2nd I revealed, fooled you. Yeah. Sort of, you know, it's my tradition because, like, you know, like I told you, when I was a sophomore in high school, got bounced out of school for fake bulletins. And what else did I did? Oh, I did a couple of years ago, I did a fake Batman cover by Tony Tallarico, who did like Batman coloring books. So I did a fake mock-up of a Charlton Batman comic, saying it was based on the TV show, and that they licensed it from the TV producers, not knowing that, like, DC wouldn't let them print it. And I had it all mocked up with the crop marks and the, you know, all the information around the edges of it, and yeah, people fell for that too.
That's awesome.
And some people got pissed.
Yeah,
you know, that they fell for it. You know,
because you've done a lot of, like, you know, editing and production and things, but you can actually, like, draw.
I'd like to think so.
And then colorist.
I mean, in my Monsters Attack book, I have a few stories I drew that, I mean, it also helps when you have Severin ink, yeah. But yeah, I'm starting a new strip in a local monthly here in Portland, like political superheroes and but yeah, I've done plenty of album covers and comic strips. I've drawn for Marvel. And
in 2014, tell us about Charlton Arrow, Charlton Neo.
Well, I at that time, my father wasn't doing well, so I decided to move in with him, take care of him. It ended up being like a year or two, and so I wasn't doing much freelance and junk. So in between, that's when I came up with this. Like, there's a Facebook page called the Charlton Arrow, and created by a Fester faceplant, also known as Mark Knox, and he was planning to do a fanzine. And a bunch of the people on the Charlton Arrow page were, comic pros and had worked at Charlton and stuff. So he was just envisioning like a black and white fanzine and stuff. And I wanted to get involved. And so I did. And then he wasn't able to, actually come through with publishing it and stuff. And I was like, I'll do it. So, we ended up doing a color comic, and I guess we did like about 10 issues and used a lot of, people who used to work at Charlton back in the day, and also people inspired by Charlton. So some of it was new stuff based on Charlton characters or in that vein, and just, did everything from Westerns to horror, superhero, sci-fi, and had a few spin-off books and everything. And then also, there'd be times I'd come up, I'd find like original stats from Charlton from that they used to publish. So I'd recolor them and stuff. And we did like, did Billy the Kid volumes. We did 2 in color and 1 collected black and white by John Severin. And that was fun to color. That was a couple hundred pages of coloring John's, beautiful, detailed, intricate Western work. So it was sort of like working with John again, collaborating with John. And so, yeah, it metamorphosized into stuff. So I would say, some of it's reprints, some of the books are reprints, some are original. So that's how that happened. It was sort of a way to waste time while I was taking care of my parents and stuff.
Yeah. Is that ongoing still?
Yeah. The Charlton Arrow itself, we did the last 3 issues, we tried direct sales, because before that, and still, you get them through my site. We have them on Amazon and at Kablam and stuff. So you can buy them online. But, we tried the direct sales thing, and it wasn't much better than when I tried Mr. A.
Yeah.
Just weren't getting a lot of orders. And yeah, for the direct sales series, we did a new E-Man by Nick Cootie and Joe Staten.
Yeah.
Done that for Charlton and stuff. So, and it was their last gasp, because then Nick passed away last year and stuff. So.
Yes. Yeah. Indie Planet, right? That's where Kablam sells their stuff.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Indie Planet. Yeah. Kablam is their printing arm, but yeah, Indie Planet and Amazon.
I made a little comic. It's 4 issues. It's on Indie Planet also.
What's the title?
Journey into Mexico is what it is.
That sounds mysterious.
It's very mysterious. Yeah. Tell me about the future. Tell us about what's coming.
Well, lately, I don't know if you've seen online and stuff, this Power Comics.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
There's this guy, Austin Howe, who is got this new line of comics, and he's lined up incredible amount of like 70s and 80s Marvel artists.
Yeah.
Like I can't, I don't want to leave anyone out, but you got like Val Merrick or Ron Wilson, or, there are just so many. So there are all these PD characters that he's reinvented. And so I'm mostly like, coloring and lettering and, doing stuff here and there, but I did a whole bunch of Twinkie parodies.
Yeah.
Remember those old Hostess parodies from the 70s? Yeah. So I did a bunch of those based on the original one. So it's sort of like inking Sal Buscema and changing the characters, or, inking Kurt Swan and stuff. So that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
And so I guess he's doing like a Kickstarter this fall, but like you know, like I said, I'm leaving out so many. Look up on Facebook Power Comics and see his page.
I'll get some.
Seriously, we just got Tom Palmer. He's gonna do some inking.
Yeah.
And because I just recently colored some Tom Palmer cover for Gemstone. And so I got Tom's contact, and so got that to Austin, and just so many great 70s, 80s artists from Marvel and stuff. And also, I have a secret project that I have signed a non-disclosure agreement, but it's gonna change the face of comics industry. It's gonna make comics take the next step, which is actually about 2 steps back, but it's gonna be 3 steps ahead, because it's gonna get comics everywhere.
Oh, really?
As opposed to just comic shops.
Yeah, distribution, something.
And I can't say much more yet.
Wow.
But it involves very well-known properties, and we're gonna get them everywhere.
Oh, wow, that's exciting.
I hope I can announce that in the very near future. And that'll be my, my next stage, my next level, my next evolutionary phase.
Yes, rising like a phoenix. Yes.
It seems like every 10 years, I managed to do something good in the last couple of years, and then what's next?
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited to learn more and find out more about that. That's awesome. Mort, thank you so much, for hanging out today. This was a real pleasure for me. It's something that I've always admired, like the stuff that you put out on Facebook. And
well, I'm a pretty peripheral character in the industry because, I'm not well known by like a lot of people, but I've certainly dipped my fingers into just about every aspect of it.
You're like a rebellious, independent thinker, and I find that really interesting and refreshing.
Well, as I've always said, I love the medium, and there's enough people doing superheroes. I want to see other stuff happen, and other genres and junk. It's like, it's like if movies only did Westerns, and now it's like, I guess it's like movies only doing superhero movies. That's sort of what's happening now, but I'd love to see other genres happen. And, as much as I enjoy doing superheroes and have done superheroes and probably have plans to do more superheroes, I'd still just like to see every possible genre being done,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for asking me. I really appreciate it.
This was a real treat. Thank you so much.